and welcome to the Journey Direction for Disciples. In this course, we're discovering what it is to be a Christian, a disciple of Jesus. And to help us along the way, we're answering 3 questions that we've asked. Who am I? Why am I here? And what am I to do? So far, we've covered the first of these 3 questions. Who am I? And we've talked about forgiveness and grace. And the fact that we've been forgiven by God because of His amazing grace. We've also looked at being adopted and loved by God. How God, because of His unstoppable love for us, has actually adopted us into His family. And in the last session, we were starting to look at the second question. Why am I here? And we've talked about the importance of obeying God and how that's actually a demonstration of our faith. And also how one of the first things that we can do when we first come to Jesus and give our lives to Him is follow His example and be baptized just like Jesus was Himself. So in this session, we're continuing to answer that second of our 3 questions. Why am I here? And we're going to be looking at worship. So let's get into it. So let's talk about worship. When we think of worship, we probably tend to think of church services, of music and singing, prayers and perhaps even liturgies. But worship, however, is much more than what takes place on a Sunday in your local church. The dictionary defines worship as reverence and respect paid to a god or God, and adoration of or devotion to a person or thing. Now, listen to these words of Jesus, and they're recorded for us in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verses 29 to 30, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation again. The most important commandment is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. Now, Jesus gives us clear direction here as to what way we're to come to God. We're to come to God wholeheartedly, concentrating all our mind and strength on Him and allowing Him full access to our very soul. God doesn't hold back in His relationship with us in any way, and proven that so dramatically when He gave us His own Son to die for us. And so we must come to God in the same way. Let's face it, God is worthy of our worship. He's undoubtedly worthy of all the love and devotion that we can bring Him. Think about what He's done for us. Think about the fact that He's given His only Son. And if giving the life of His Son was the only thing that God has given to us, then that alone would be more than we deserve. But in actual fact, He gives us blessing upon blessing every single day of our lives. Okay. We're going to do some thinking. I want you to write down either in a notebook or in your copy of the manual if you have it, some things to give God thanks for. Just make a list of them. You may think it's quite difficult to start with, but trust me, when you start to write things that you want to give thanks to God for, you'll suddenly find there's a lot coming out. So we'll take a break and I'll see you then in a few moments. So, how'd you get on? You probably find there's a lot of things when you get started that you want to list to give thanks to God for. That's a good thing to do on a regular basis, I think. Just remind ourselves of all the blessings that God gives us. It'll do you good. Though more than what God has done for us is the simple fact that He is simply God. Every day we live for Him, we'll find out more about Him and see that He is the Lord God Almighty, and by His very existence is therefore worthy of our worship. So, let's deal then with each of the 4 categories that Jesus gave us in Mark chapter 12. Our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. So number 1, our heart. When the Bible talks about our heart, it means the very center of our being, the place where all our emotions are stored. It's the real you, the invisible you that no one else gets to see. It's in your heart that you will find all the things that are most important to you. It's from your heart that all your emotions spring, and the place where your deepest hopes and fears reside. So let's look at some verses from the Bible together. Look up in the New Testament in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, and the second part of verse 34. And then go into the Old Testament to the book of Proverbs and chapter 27 and verse 19. And I'll see you in a few moments. Okay, did you get those? Good. It's interesting that quotation from Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34, where Jesus says, "For whatever is in your heart determines what you say," and that's in the New Living Translation. We realize then how important our heart is to us because of the influence it has on us, on who we are and how we'll act. So Jesus is telling us that we're to love God with all of our heart, giving Him control of the very center of our lives. We therefore worship God by devoting all of our heart to Him. Now this means that we can't simply come to worship just with our body alone by merely singing and clapping along to our favorite hymns or the latest worship songs. Because God knows what really is in our hearts when we're doing that. And this is what He is actually really interested in. Listen to this verse from the Old Testament in 1 Chronicles 28 and verse 9. "For the Lord sees every heart and understands and knows every plan and thought." Again, that's the New Living Translation. The condition of our heart will determine what our thoughts and intentions will be. All our motives and attitudes come from our heart. Hearts that are given to God as an act of worship are really the kind of hearts that God is looking for. So number 2, our soul. Our souls are where our living self is found. It's the part of us that's eternal. It's the part of us that has the hallmark stamp of God on it. The Hebrew and Greek words used in the Bible for soul, because in the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew and the New Testament in Greek. And those words actually refer to breath. When we take into account how man was created, we see that God Himself put that very breath into us by breathing into man. Listen to this from Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7. "And the Lord God formed a man's body from the dust of the ground and breathed into it the breath of life, and the man became a living person." It's our very life breath that God has given to us, the very life breath that we are in turn to love and to worship Him with. We're to worship Him with our very nature itself, giving Him our breath, our soul. So let's look at the third of our categories, our mind. And our mind is where we do our thinking. It's the worktop for our heart. Because out of our hearts come all our hopes and dreams and plans, finding their way into our minds where they begin to be thought through and planned. It's a place of constant activity, a seemingly never-ending operation center that occupies our head, continually moving. Our mind is a place where we give shape and form to what comes from our heart by way of attitudes and emotions. The mind's a very complex thing, full of deep mysteries and secrets. Think of it like this. If the heart is the engine room giving power and resources to the ship that is our lives, then our mind would be the bridge, the command center where information is being processed. It takes effort to concentrate our mind, but that's what we're to do if we're to really love and worship God. We can't just let our minds wander around aimlessly entertaining every thought that happens to pass through it. To offer God the true love and devotion that He really deserves, we should therefore train our minds to think about God and His love as a matter of our daily living. Now, listen to this verse from the Old Testament, from the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 28, and the first part of verse 9. Worship and serve the Lord with your whole heart and with a willing mind. Again, New Living Translation. There are also real benefits to focusing your mental energies on worshiping God. So let's look up a verse together and see what it says. And the verse is in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 26 and verse 3. See you in a moment. Okay, do you get that? Great verse. And the promise that we have here is that God will give us peace as we direct our thoughts towards Him. And not just any peace, but His perfect peace. We'll find that thinking about God and His ways will bring peace to our very mind itself. That's why the Bible encourages us very strongly to keep thinking about God and what He says. Because by changing the way we think, we actually begin to change the way we act until we become more and more like Jesus. You can't change the way you act until you change the way you think. Listen to this verse. The Apostle Paul wrote this in the book of Romans in the New Testament. In chapter 12 and verse 2, he said, "But let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think." Remember, living for Jesus is about a day-by-day walk with Him, and changing the way that you think will not happen overnight, but it's something you can work at every day. So don't get downhearted. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen all at once. Just keep doing it. Just remind yourself that every day with Jesus is a brand new day. So let's go to number 4, our strength. And strength is to do with our physical being, the person that we and everybody else can see. The previous categories have all been taking place inside of us, invisible to the eye, while our strength is to do with what we can see, our bodies. Here's what the Apostle Paul says about our bodies. So let's look up another verse together. And you're going to find it in the New Testament again, in the book of Romans, chapter 12 and verse 1. See you in a moment. Did you get that? Good. It's with our bodies that we are able to do things. We're able to perform tasks of various kinds using gifts and talents that God has placed within us. Our body also puts into action the various emotions and thoughts that are going on inside of us. With our body, we're able to do things for good or for evil. And so we face the choice every day of either doing things for ourselves or doing them for God. When we choose to do anything for God and not for selfish reasons, then it becomes an act of love and worship to Him. So let's try and discover how to worship God through something that you can do. We all have natural gifts, abilities, and interests that God can use, because He did make us after all, and so it's reasonable to assume that He knew what He was doing when He gave us all of these gifts and intended for us to use them. So here's what to do. Begin to make a note of some things under the following 2 headings: things that I like to do and things that I'm good at. Now, these don't have to be long lists. Just think about each heading and write down what comes into your mind. But when you come to things I am good at, don't be fooled into thinking that you're not good at anything. Everybody is good at something. Think about the things that you do every day of your life, whether at home, school, work, and don't limit yourself by only thinking you have to write things that will impress other people, like I like skydiving or nuclear physics, when what you really like to do is talk to people. Because if it's important to you, then it's important to God. Okay? So we're going to do that now, and we're going to take a break, and you maybe want to go off and grab some tea or coffee at this stage and take a little bit of time to write your list, and I'll see you afterwards. And welcome back. How did that go? Well, I hope. You are not who you are by accident. God has made you the way that you are for a reason and for a purpose. Everything that you've written is important to God because He made you. And if you let Him, He can use the things in your list to glorify Him. Ask God to show you ways that you can worship Him by using some of those things, if not all of the things that you've written down. There will be opportunities every day for us to honor God by doing good to others, not only to those who we know, but also to complete strangers. The Christian should be someone who stands out from the crowd because of the way that they love and they care for people. This is how God is, and this is how then we should be. So maybe you're asking, how can I help people? Well, by simply being kind and thoughtful to them in what you say and do. So let's listen to what the Bible says, and we'll look up another verse together. And we're going into the New Testament again, to the book of Galatians. And we're going to chapter 6 and verse 10. So look it up, make a note of it, and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so you see here that Christians should be the type of people who excel in doing good things. We should be constantly using our creativity to come up with ways that we can bless other people. Just pause for a moment and think about the ways in which you could do something good, not only to those who you love and like, but even to those people that you don't. Because Jesus said in Luke chapter 6 and verse 27, to do good to those who hate you. Our strength also refers to how we relate to the physical world around us and the fruit we receive in using our physical capabilities. Our time, for instance, is a very valuable commodity to us. Our money as well is something we receive mainly as a result of our physical effort. If we truly seek to love God in the physical world, then we must adopt a new way of thinking, as we discussed in our mind. And consider the fact that it's no longer our time or money, but that all things in the physical world actually belong to God. So we'll look up a verse, and we're going into the Old Testament, to the book of Psalms, and Psalm 24 and verse 1. So look it up and write it down, and I'll see you in a moment. Okay, did you get that? That's an amazing verse. In my Bible, it says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to Him. Everything that we do, we should do to glorify God as an act of love for Him. When we act like this, then we truly begin to worship God. So look up some more verses. And we're going into the New Testament again, to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, verses 19 to 20. Look them up, write them down, and I'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. Did you get that okay? These verses are known as the Great Commission. And this command of Jesus should be all that we need to motivate us to worship Him by using our energy, our strength to serve Him by reaching out to other people with the same love that He reached us with. When you do something for God, you're worshiping Him with your strength. Next time, we're going to be going into the final section of the course and answering the last of our 3 questions. What am I to do? So I'll see you next time, but until then, stay encouraged.